Great. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our second and last event for the First Gen Student Success Series at CUNY SPS. My name is Dr. Carla Marquez-Lewis. I'm from the psychology department, and along with Dr. Elizabeth Alsop, who is also here on the call, we co-founded this series for First Gen students, and we tackle lots of different things. Hopefully, you've attended some of our past events. We really wanted to create a place where First Gen students could really explore different tips and strategies for success in college. So today we are joined by a wonderful panel of faculty who were once First Gen students as well. And I'm going to pass it to Dr. Alsop to do the intros, and we're looking forward to a wonderful conversation. Thank you all for joining.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I just want to echo Dr. Marquez-Lewis's warm, enthusiastic welcome. Thank you for being here. It's a testament to the success of our panelists that they have such long and robust bios that I am not going to read them out loud. And actually, the chat is telling me they're too long to paste. So I'm going to give you the abbreviated version and work on putting them in the chat so you can read a little bit more about all the panelists in depth. And also, I'm sure they'll be sharing some elements of their biography and their background with you as they talk today. So we're really lucky to have 6 wonderful speakers with us. And I'm just going to sort of list them in alphabetical order. The first is Joseph Foy, who is over here in my sort of left corner, who is a faculty member in our business program. We also have with us Angela Francis, our Assistant Dean of General Education and First Year Experience here at the CUNY School of Professional Studies. And then we have a number of faculty from our psychology program, including Dr. Kelly Rabenstein, who I think is right below me on my Zoom screen there. And Leanne Starkey, who, is over there on the right. Hi, Leanne. And also finally, Chelsea Hansen, also from psychology. And then we also have another representative of our business program, Herbert Sherman. So thank you all 6 of you for joining us today. And as I said, thank you, Heather, for putting those bios up there. I'll work on getting them into the chat as well. But we wanted to get right to the discussion today, right? So I'm going to go ahead and launch our little PowerPoint here, and you can see everyone's name. Give me 1 second. Okay. Everyone seeing that okay? Okay, so these are our 6 panelists today, and we assembled this group because, as is probably evident from the title of today's event, they were all first generation students who are now faculty members or academic workers. And we really wanted to invite them to share their advice, their insights, their success stories, their guidance, their caveats, right? Their thoughts with you today. So feel free as you're listening to our panelists, if questions occur to you, you can throw those into the chat. We'll also leave some time for Q&A at the end, okay? And I'll do my best to monitor the chat. So the first question that we wanted to ask the group, and we did kind of ask them to think a little bit about this before today, was really about how they felt their experience as first generation students, has informed their approach to teaching, their work as a faculty member and or as an administrator. So I don't know if anyone in the group wants to get us started today, but feel free to raise your hand or just jump right in.
Okay. So I'll start it off.
Great, right, thanks, Joe. All
right, so basically, just to let everybody know, I'm an accounting professor by trade, so that's what I've been doing for many, many years. And I know that accounting can be very, very difficult and very, very challenging. And throughout the years, I've taught several thousand students, and only a handful actually have family members or accountants. So they really don't have that much guidance to be able to tackle this type of discipline. And like I said, so it's very, very involved, and it takes a lot of dedication to be able to learn this particular subject matter. So me being a first generation student, I didn't have any kind of guidance. I had no one to go to talk about accounting or business. My father, my mother, they were not in this area. My aunts and uncles were not in this area. Pretty much my friends that I grew up with, their parents were not in this area. So I really didn't have that much. I had to rely on other faculty members to be able to try to guide me as to what's happening. So over the years, as I became an adjunct, and I've been teaching since 1999 as an adjunct full time for the last 7 or so years, that I started noticing a lot of students that kind of lost. They don't know what's going on. They have no idea what they want to do. They don't know what accounting is about. They don't know what business is about in general. They don't understand their opportunities. So for me, coming from that type of background where I was a student sitting in a classroom and I was just as lost as they are today, that I would have to kind of guide them and try to get them to understand all these different types of opportunities. So I kind of approach my students as you know, my students as more sympathetic, more understanding, because I've basically been there, done that. And also it really doesn't form me in the workload that I give them. You have to try to give them a little bit more of a balanced workload, knowing that their experiences coming into this and their guidance and their mentors in their family are probably not present simply because they're first generation students as well. So you have to be able to understand how to give that good balance where you can tell them, okay, this is the career approach you could do, but also the work that they actually do. You can't overwhelm them. And you overwhelm the student, then they get basically depressed about what they're doing and they don't feel successful. And then they kind of doubt what they're doing and why they're doing it. And they have no one to talk to. So just basically, you know, you try to be there to try to help them out as much as possible, give as much as guidance.
That's great. Thank you so much, Joe, for starting us off. Angela, did you want to add to what Joe's saying?
For sure. I think Joe, his point about, you know, sympathy and also recognizing the areas where first generation students where we don't have this experience and these outside resources to go to is really valuable. I know I had friends in undergrad who had parents who were professors and so could go and ask their parents these questions, you know, whereas my parents did not go to college, much less graduate school. And so at either level, I could not ask them those questions. I think at the same time also, both within the classroom and in my current role where I work on sort of support services for first year students, I do need to think about the balance that Joe was mentioning, but I also want to think about how I can make clear that I recognize the different set of knowledge that a lot of us come in with. We don't necessarily know how to navigate a college classroom or a college campus. And for me, speaking personally, I know that made me doubt sometimes if I belonged there. But the knowledge I did have and the knowledge that my family had in other areas was still relevant. And sometimes I just needed help both seeing that relevance and also seeing how that was also really valid. So I think that's the second way that it really does inform my approach to my role in and out of the classroom.
That's great, Angela. I'm so glad you talked about kind of, you know, the assets that students are bringing with them, right? We talk a lot about avoiding a deficit mindset, right? And I think that sometimes students need you to tell them, hey, this is an asset, right? Name for them like what it is that they have that's like an incredible source of, you know, of value and expertise. Does anyone else want to weigh in or maybe surface something that hasn't come up yet about kind of how your own experience has informed your career? And I know some of you may not be able to raise your hands or use the raise hands function, so feel free to just jump in if you want to add something.
I would just say I found the process of going to college, being on a campus, interacting with professors to be really intimidating because my father had an 8th grade education and my mom a 9th grade education. And so I grew up with a completely different background than most of my classmates as far as socioeconomic status and things like that. And so I think a lot of times faculty can assume that it's a level playing field when oftentimes it isn't. You know, we've all come from such different backgrounds and different experiences, and those can be all valuable but different. And so I think lowering the intimidation that students can feel is so important, and just making sure that they know that we're on their side. And I think that the experiences that I've had have led me to show up more as a cheerleader for my students and really encouraging them. And also just making sure they know that I'm approachable, their other faculty are approachable, because it is so intimidating if you do not have that example to pull from.
Yeah, that's such a great point, Chelsea. That's something that's come up, I think, across this entire series, right? The, really the hidden curriculum that all students experience, but that I think first-gen students are maybe particularly sensitive to or aware of, right? Because these things are all made up, right? No one comes in knowing how to request a letter of recommendation, right? Or how to go to office hours. These things are really conventional and sort of idiosyncratic. And so doing that work that you're talking about in terms of cheerleading, in terms of being really transparent with students about how procedures work is such important work to do with them. Herbert, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, but it's interesting. When I heard Joe talk, it's sort of like Joe was reading my mind. So I just want to go in a slightly different direction and talk about assets. One of the biggest assets I got being a first generation student was from my father and grandfather. My grandfather came from Ukraine in 1910 with nothing. And he constantly persevered through, my name was changed from Shebekowski to Sherman, by the way. He really persevered, and he did this with no formal education. He went to yeshiva. He was a rabbi. My father survived high school growing up in Harlem, started his own businesses. And although, my mother nor father went to college, what I saw from both of them was what I would call that first generation mentality of push, push, push. And they couldn't have helped me in terms of content, but they always said to me, you can do this. We know you can do this. Put the effort in. And I think that, if anyone would ask for a recommendation, don't give up on yourself. And I think, and luckily, I think first generation students are lucky in the fact that they have their family support saying, yes, we know you have to work, you have to do all these other things, but you can do this. So I would want to share that with the group out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the importance, I think Chelsea used the word cheerleading, which I really liked, but like we all need a pep talk sometimes, especially at certain points in the semester. Our students, are obviously so often overextended, right? Obligated to work, to family, to school, and sometimes just even like an individual email, just checking in, right? Or a little follow-up to say, hey, I really loved your discussion board post this week. That can really boost someone's spirits and kind of keep them feeling connected to their own agency and their own efficacy. So I love this. I love this positive messaging. Anyone else who hasn't gotten a chance to share yet want to weigh in on this question or share some thinking? Yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
Hi, I just wanted to say one of the main ways that being first generation college student impacts my teaching in particular is that at the beginning of every class, I like to offer myself as a mentor, because one thing that I learned throughout college was that I didn't have the social capital. It wasn't just, sorry, I'm getting over a really bad cold. It wasn't just the education or the academic pieces, but there were also things I didn't realize about needing mentors to get internships, how to get jobs, things like that. So I love to give students sort of a pathway to psychology, depending on where they are in their education. It's obviously very different for undergraduate students than it is for first-year master's students. But I found in my own experience that the pathway to becoming, for me, a psychologist was very confusing. I actually got a whole degree that was basically useless because I didn't realize that there was a pathway to practice, and I didn't have that mentorship or someone to help me. In fact, no one had ever mentioned to me going to graduate school at all. And so I really love to introduce that to students, especially if there's a capstone class, for those of you who are familiar with it, students that are working on research. And I love to introduce an idea that they might not have had before, which is you could publish this. But sometimes I think when we know representation matters. When the idea isn't presented to us that it's even a possibility. I mean, I remember the first time a professor said, oh, you could get a doctorate, and my brain just swirled around. So I like to be that person. I like to very clearly and distinctly put in my courses, how does it work? What degrees are needed? And what are the things that you might want to be looking for when you're applying to degree granting programs? You know, if you want to be a psychologist or a counselor, what are the things that you're looking for that will help you on your path? What kind of letters do you need? And I like to think of it as the magic opening door. So what are we looking for? At this point in my career, I've been on the other side of it longer than I was a student or the one applying. What are the secret things that we're looking for? I like to share all of those things with students so that they know what the secrets are, sort of the barriers of entry to, you know, where they might want to go, and to make myself available as a resource for those things. I feel very passionately about that.
That's amazing, Kelly. I love this idea too, because sometimes those obstacles can be so small. It could be something as little as not knowing to waive your right to view this recommendation, right? Or whatever, something that again is just completely arbitrary and conventional, but how would you possibly know that, right? To the kind of bigger disciplinary kinds of, sort of curricula that students may not be familiar with. So that is I think these are such important points that you're raising. And Herbert, you also kind of talked about the sort of possibilities for even collaboration with your students. Do you want to say a little bit more about that? You mentioned it in the chat.
Sure. I'm very lucky in the fact that Joe and the School of Business allow me to teach the capstone course, both undergrad and grad. And their field project is a analysis of a business. And his, what I've done with the better papers is we've turned them into published cases. And in fact, my last two published cases, I've been co-author, second author to their work. And I think this is an exceptional opportunity for students. And it's not bad PR for CUNY as well.
That's great. I love that. That's such a great story to have. Let's move on, unless there's any other thoughts here, but obviously we can keep talking about this topic, to our next sort of organizing question here, which I think picks up on what we've already been talking about. So challenges and opportunities, right? And again, you've already started, I think, raising some of these, but what do you feel like some of the challenges, some of the opportunities that that being sort of a first-gen student has sort of presented as you've navigated an academic career? And Leanne, I see your hand.
I love it. I could go for days on this question, so let me know if I'm going too long. It's funny because the challenges and opportunities kind of flow into the same thing. Like I think something we already touched on, the biggest challenge is not having someone, to guide you through this world the way that people who have, parents or family do. I didn't have anyone to help me apply to colleges. Our guidance counselor didn't even do that in the school I went to. They even told us we didn't need to learn how to parallel park because we would never leave, presumably, the rural area where I grew up in. Why would you need to learn to parallel park? You're not leaving. So that's the kind of place I grew up in. I applied to exactly one school, the University of Pittsburgh, because it was in state and as far away from my hometown as I could go. And luckily I got in, and luckily it was a great experience for me, but I literally only applied to one school, right? Nobody told, because the application fees I was paying out of my own pocket. And I did the FAFSA by myself. And I learned the hard way that doing your taxes independently doesn't make you independent for FAFSA. And right, like all these little things that I just didn't have anyone to help me with, and had to kind of learn the hard way. But at the same time, I think one of those things gave me opportunities, like work, like the federal work study program made my career. I got work study. I knew I had to work. I also worked a non-work study job. That work study job got me an on-campus job, and this also falls into a challenge. One of the first challenges I had, and actually it was an ongoing challenge for a really long time, was learning code switching, like the white collar code switching, and like how to write emails, and like who's going to be mad if you curse in polite company and whatever. And I don't care about that now, but but having work study, like I got to work in a like just sorting mail for secretaries at like a surgeon's office, and I got introduced to I learned what collating meant. I learned how to use a copy machine. I'd never touched a copy machine in my whole life, right? Like literally, I remember someone was mad because I didn't know what collating meant. Why would I know that? No one I know works in an office.
But I learned those things. And then I got work study in a research lab on campus. And I didn't know psych research was a career. I thought that's the other thing was like, you kind of only know careers of the people around you. And where I grew up, if you had a college degree, you were like a nurse or a teacher. And when I thought of psychologist, I thought clinical only. And so I wasn't interested in that field. And then when I was like, research is a whole job and it's really interesting. And I didn't even know. And because of that, I got actual research experience. I worked for years in that lab. I met 2 professors who mentored me into grad school. And as someone was just saying here, like told me I could go to grad school, which no one did. I thought PhDs were for like some super elite, super smart, whatever force. And they were like, oh no, you're on the path. And they mentored me into it. And I realized that it wasn't this really super guarded thing, right? So yeah, anyway, I'll stop talking about it.
No, so many great points raised there. Leanne, I don't know if anyone wants to respond to anything Leanne was just saying. I'm seeing some activity in the chat. Feel free to jump in.
Yeah, I would just echo the challenges with applying to college in the first place as far as application fees. I related so much to what you shared about filling out the FAFSA. This makes me feel so old, but I remember going to the public library when I was in high school and having a printed FAFSA and having to figure it out. And those, like you said, those challenges do turn into opportunities via work study and other things like that. So yeah, I share what you mentioned there.
And, this is, I think, a great point too, because I think sometimes students think they can only go to their faculty to talk about the specific content of a given course. But I'm sure, like all of you, I'm very happy to talk to students about, and not that I always have the answers, but just about, funding grad school and, all of the kinds of logistical procedural sort of obstacles that may present themselves, or I can direct you to the office at SPS that might be able to give you more of that information. Angela, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, I think what everyone has been saying was really sort of triggering some memories in me, some really positive and some not so positive about my experiences. And I think thinking about the challenges, I had 2 big ones, one of which, like Leanne said, was also an opportunity. I think for me, the challenge was sort of because I didn't have people who had done this, who had traveled this path. I didn't have people who had done it built into my system telling me I could do it. And therefore, if someone who was a professor or an advisor told me I couldn't do it, that really hit very hard for me. I had a professor who told me point blank she thought I would fail in graduate school. And I almost did not go purely because she said that. Because that was the only voice of someone who had done it, who was in my circle. And I think that taught me, sort of opportunity time, that taught me, don't take one person's voice as sort of the gospel with these things, particularly if they're telling you you can't do something. Be that spiteful one, I'm going to do it for that reason person. And the other challenge that was definitely an opportunity for me was that I just, again, as everyone has already said, like, we don't know how to navigate these circles. But for me, that was also an opportunity because nobody knew how to navigate these circles. And I just happened to know I didn't know how to navigate the circles. And so I asked the questions that really everyone probably should have been asking, but thought that they didn't need to. And there was, first of all, asking those questions got me the answers, but also going to people and asking the questions was a way to open up relationships with faculty and staff that then ended up counterbalancing that person I mentioned before. And even beyond, when I went into graduate school, were still voices of support and knowledge and sort of thought partners with me that made my experience both more enjoyable, but also more useful and really led directly to the sort of role that I'm in now.
That's great, Angela. And what you're saying makes me think again, back to Kelly's comment about mentors, and I know you and I have talked about mentorship in the context of a recent collaboration, but that idea that, in the absence of some of that guidance, there is that opportunity to go actively find other folks, right, who can help kind of fill in those gaps a bit. Joe, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to share my experience actually starting out in school, in college. I actually wanted to be a surgeon. And I started going to school and it didn't kind of work out. And then I started getting kind of more of an interest in business. And I didn't know where I wanted to go, what I wanted to do. And I'm a kid from Brooklyn, and I decided that I'm going to enroll into Kingsborough Community College. So when I enrolled into Kingsborough, I was in the business department. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. And I started taking business classes and accounting classes. So when I started taking my accounting classes, I just became instantaneously very interested in accounting. I found it not easy, but there were challenges, but I saw many of my other classmates had tremendous challenges and they couldn't understand the information that their professors were imparting on them. So I became a tutor and I started tutoring students. Now, my story, I think, is pretty interesting in that I would ask anybody and anybody, I couldn't care less who you are. If I saw someone with an accounting textbook open in a library, in the cafeteria, in a classroom, I would just go up to them and ask them if they need any help. Do you need any help solving problems? Are you having any difficulties? And because of that, I started becoming very, very good in accounting. But it also led me to become a college assistant in a tutoring department. So at the time, Kingsborough had a very vibrant tutoring department. They had over 1,000 students that always sought out tutoring. SPS also has tutoring, and other schools at CUNY have tutoring. And because of those tutoring opportunities, working as a college assistant, it led me into the registrar's office to do registrations, and it led me to bursar's office to do this, and it led me to become a lifeguard on the campus and being in the gym. And being in the gym, you started to pal around with all of the professors that would come in and work out, and they would get to know you on a first name basis. And before I knew it, within probably maybe 1.5 years, I knew every important person in Kingsborough. I knew the president, I knew the provost, I knew the deans, I knew professors all over the place. And because of that, those opportunities of becoming a college assistant paved a huge path. And then I stuck around just being a tutor for many, many years. I actually tutored for 6 years. Then I started working for IRS and I became a revenue agent, then a criminal investigator for many, many years. But in 1999, this was about maybe 10 years after I had left college, my bachelor's degree, an opportunity came up to become an adjunct. And because I knew everybody and anybody in Kingsborough, when an opportunity came up, they recognized me as a go-to person. So that led me into a long career as an adjunct, and I've been doing that for about 24 years now as that my full-time capacity. But don't be, don't be scared or don't be nervous to try to seek out work opportunities in your school. It leads to so many other opportunities because once people start to get to know who you are on a first name basis, it really does open up the door. And this is something that Herb was basically saying about publishing. And I also encourage my students to potentially publish and get to know your professors very, very well. Professors don't, they know who you are, but they don't know who you are. A lot of us have many, many students in our class. We get to know who you are, but time erodes and we may remember your name and stuff, but time erodes if you're just a student in a class and there's no professional relationship building. So the other opportunities I've had is to basically develop this professional relationship building over many, many years. And I tell my students, if they're going to come to me for a letter of recommendation, if I really don't know what you're about and what your likes are, dislikes, and some of the things outside the classroom, it becomes difficult for me to write a really strong letter of recommendation and be that cheerleader. So I would encourage you to develop these professional relationships with your teachers, and the opportunities will become just endless. You'll be very, very shocked.
That's great, Joe. Thank you so much. Leanne, we're going to let you have the last word on this question and then move on to the next.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in addition, we want to mentor you in not like just how you do in the classroom, but your careers, but like a mentor can also like, I volunteered for a mentor program for first gen college students, and like we can help you navigate systems, like your financial aid systems even, and like things that are impossible. Like sometimes that's the hardest part of college is like getting the bureaucracy straight. And I just wanted to tell like this story as an example. So the young lady I mentored was going to she switched between 2 CUNY undergrads. And after a while, it was clear that the first CUNY undergrad had somehow messed up her financial aid and was like still claiming it, even though she wasn't going there. And then the one she was going to was saying like she didn't have it. And like the systems weren't talking to each other. And every time she went to the, bursar to talk about it, like they didn't understand what was going, they couldn't help, like nobody could figure out what was, and she couldn't articulate enough to help her. I found the office number of the person who was the head of financial at the first college. I pretended to be an employee from the second college, and I explained the issue, and she fixed it. She fixed it, right? Like you can, like a mentor can help you navigate that system that you otherwise would. At the end of the call, she was like, "What was your name and position again?" And I was like, "I have to go by," but she fixed it, right? And she was not. Nobody was going to fix this for her. So like, yes, please, we want to help you with like all of these things. Like we can and we will. As much as you want to reach out, we will reach back out to you.
That's wonderful, Leanne. That's a really good reminder. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide, and I think Carla is going to introduce the next question.
Yeah, sure. So we want to transition a little bit. I mean, we're sort of on the same idea of sort of advice and tips and strategies, but what's one piece of advice that you'd share with first generation students who are also interested in pursuing an academic career? Some of these things have already come up, but anyone want to start us off with this?
I'll start. I remember when I first went skiing, and I was in Iowa and we don't have mountains, so the skiing was not challenging at all. I remember my sister telling me, just ski the 5 feet in front of you. And now when anything challenging happens, we have that as sort of our inside joke, and she'll say, just ski the 5 feet in front of you. And I've shared that with my students. And by that, I mean, do the discussion prompt, do the assignment, and just stop focusing on how many years you have left to go, and just ski that 5 feet in front of you. Do that next thing that you have to do, meet with your study group, whatever it is. But it's just, you will get to the finish line. It feels like it's going to take forever, but it won't. Most of us, if not all of us in this group, have been out of school longer than we were in. And it felt like for us too, that it would take forever, but just do that next thing and ski the 5 feet in front of you, and you will reach your goals.
Thanks, Chelsea. Kelly, you had some advice as well?
Oh, you're on mute, I think.
Sorry, I didn't want you to hear all of my pets and my coughing. I'm getting over a cold. My biggest piece of advice, which I wish someone had told me, there's 2 pieces. One is that although sometimes, and this is not true of everyone, it was hard for me to balance my family's, I love my family very much. At the same time, there were times when they did not understand, many times, why I wanted to pursue the college choices that I made, and then especially graduate school. And really, so there's sort of 2 pieces of advice. One is find your people, that help you feel like you're not alone in this. You have peers, you have mentors, really building your supports around you. So seeking out, and this is mirroring what people have said earlier, mentors who can help you, who understand what you're going through, and who will tell you things, help open doors for you, and really guide you and give you good advice, and then take the advice. And then the second piece is more personal, which is to take care of yourself emotionally, because yes, our families, often it can be a 2-way street. And I've heard this many times with people who are first generation college students, first generation, possibly immigrated to wherever you're living. A lot of things that you might be doing that are different from what your family experienced. whether they're meaning well or they're confused about what you're doing, but to really have some support and understand that you have to kind of go by your own light and guide yourself on your path, even if it's not fitting in with the story or the narrative that your family had for you. And maybe even, at times I got some pretty serious feedback that was not friendly from especially my extended family about the choices I made. And I feel like what I kept in mind, it was the life that I wanted to create for myself. And we don't bring this up very often, but the money piece is huge. Trying to navigate, figuring out the finances of college and then graduate school on my own. I literally was on the student website this morning, and maybe you don't want to hear that, but I did it and I figured it out, and having supports was the key piece of that. So there's the emotional piece, and then the very real support of having guidance and mentors, et cetera, and peers that can help you along the way. So those are my 2 pieces of advice. And also one more thing, finding a partner if you're at that part of your life who supports what you're trying to do and is willing to take those risks and challenges along with you, especially if parenthood comes into your life on your pathway. So finding people who are going through that as well, and having that support is humongous.
Great. Thank you. We'll go Leanne and then Joe and then Angela.
I think one thing is that it's very, very important to talk to people in the field to make sure that the degree you're pursuing matches the outcome that you hope. I think a lot of people think like a PhD means you're going to make a lot of money or you're going to get a job in a certain field or job security, and joke's on you. So like, just make sure, right? Like make sure you really, really know what you're getting into before you pursue it by talking to someone who's done it, and then it matches. There was a time when like every student in PhD programs always got funding, and that time is no more. And so you need to be, if funding, I mean, we're talking about like anywhere from like a 5 to 10 year commitment. So if they aren't telling you in writing that there is funding for you that whole time and you cannot afford that tuition, do not go into debt assuming that a PhD will pay for it. It absolutely will not, depending on the field you are in. And you need to get it in writing before you go. And if you can't, then it has to be something that you can afford, knowing like your salary might not exponentially increase after. And then my final and biggest piece of advice is that if you were pursuing like a research-based program, make sure that there are plenty of faculty members with active, well-funded research projects, because those projects are what you will use for your dissertation. And if they don't have them, then you will need to fund and find ways to fund your own research for your dissertation. And that will make things very long and very hard. So those are my strong pieces of advice.
Thanks, Leanne. Joe?
Okay, so mine's going to be fairly short because a lot of it's already covered, but for the most part, learning is a lifelong event, and you just got to constantly learn over time, and that's never going to stop. So life is not a race when it comes to an academic career. To this day, I'm still learning. I sit and I study probably 4 hours a day on an average, just in addition to what I normally do, just as my regular job, just simply because there's so many new things that are out there. So never feel that this is a race to be able to get to the top as quickly as possible. It literally happens over a lifetime. That's it.
Angela? Thanks, Joe.
So I'm going to disregard the one there. Sorry, Carla. I'll give you some, but I'll make them nice and short. The first is don't just focus on the hurdles. In grad school in particular, I was like, okay, I have to do this. This is the exam. I have to do this. I have to pass these language exams. Here's my orals. And I missed a lot of the learning and the opportunities that I could have had along the way. I think I did a lot of that because as a first-gen student, I was so focused on what do I have to do to achieve my goal? And so I was missing everything else along the way. Second, don't count yourself out. And if a faculty member or someone else pays you a compliment about a piece of work you did, about you, about how smart you are, about how much you deserve to be there, take the compliment. Don't discount the compliment. And lastly, looking at the question in the chat about what to do if you are working full-time. It really was only a problem for me when it came to figuring out course schedules. So if you're going in somewhere, check and see if there's either online asynchronous courses or courses that are scheduled in the evening. The grad center, the program I was in, had evening courses from 6:30 to 8 that you could take. After that, a lot of the work is self-paced, and having a job actually helped me because it got me out of the thinking where I was like, I have to have this long uninterrupted block of time where I can think my brilliant thoughts. And instead it was, I have an hour. What can I do in that hour? So those would be my three. Sorry for disregarding the one piece of advice.
It's okay. More is better in this case. So Herbert, you had something as well.
Yes, well, two things. I saw the pop-up in the chat again about part-time PhD programs. It's very field specific. Joe will certainly support me in the fact that business programs in particular now cater to those people who work full-time, and they, except for rare institutions, predominantly are part-time programs. I think the bigger issue is understanding the difference between a PhD, which is a research doctoral degree, and let's say a DPS or DBA, which is an applied degree. Now, it's ironic that Harvard offers a DBA and not a PhD. So if you go to Harvard, trust me, not a problem getting that DBA, but other institutions offer applied degrees that are more focused on the practitioner side of the house. But I think it's very easy now, but it is very field specific. My impression of psychology, and my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, they tend to be more full-time degree programs. I know the one at LIU is, which is where my full-time institution. So that's interesting. The other thing is, and I can talk from personal experience, I had my dissertation proposal turned down 6 times. It took me 3 years to get a proposal accepted, and my colleagues will tell you that's very long. It took me another 15 years and 3 different academic institutions to get tenure. And I can tell you now, tenure, if you pardon the pun, is a tenuous process at best. Most institutions are even walking away from the tenure process. But I go back to what I said earlier, you can't give up. And it means finding mentors, it means networking in the field, going to those conferences, becoming part of the professional societies in your field. These to me were very helpful in my career path, especially establishing my field of research, which is case research. I would never have become a case writer if I didn't go to a case research seminar. It opened my eyes in terms of another field that is not very traditional outside of business. So be open and push. Understand you are going to meet obstacles, but you can get through them. I know if I can do it, anyone can do it.
Thank you. Kelly, did you have another thing to add, or is your hand still up from before? I wasn't sure.
I think it might still be
Might
up.
still be up.
It's still up from before. Sorry, I couldn't find the button.
That's okay. So let's go ahead and transition to our next question. And thank you for those wonderful pieces of advice, everyone. I'll pass it back to you, Elizabeth.
Great. Yeah, and I just wanted to sort of boost the signal on a point Heather made in the chat that we do offer, actually, thanks to Dr. Marquez-Lewis, a whole graduate school preparation series. So students who are grad school curious can, really engage in these more in-depth granular conversations about the various stages in the application process, and also, join breakout rooms, because a lot of this is very discipline or field specific. So that's something to look forward. Thank you, Heather. You're so on the ball. So our kind of last official question, and then we're happy to open it up to participants' questions. is, again, just kind of continuing the theme of offering insights and advice. And so this question really is, I guess, a little bit more, maybe more personal, but we've already gotten pretty personal. But what's something that you know now that you really wish you had known as a first generation student? And again, we've touched on this a little bit, but Herbert, I see your hand.
Thank you. It absolutely matters where you go to school. I'm sorry to say it, but it makes a big difference. If I look at my career path, the fact that I graduated from a non-traditional PhD program meant when I went on job interviews, I had to justify, why would I go there? Why didn't I go to NYU? Why didn't I go to Baruch? Why didn't go to Columbia? And again, it may be discipline specific, but clearly getting into a major university and getting into a well-known degree program is critical for your career path, both in terms of your success as well as, I'll be candid, salary. It makes a really big difference. And I put it out there, and I wish I knew that, because I would have done something different.
Yeah, I think that's a really good, I mean, that is a sort of, I think, unfortunate reality of academia, which tends to be very hierarchical and prestige driven. And, you know, some folks may have different designs, different goals, right? So in the humanities, it's still very much the expectation that with a PhD, you are entering into a period of extended training to be a faculty member at a university. As the job market continues to collapse, there's been a lot of debate and discussion about that. In some other fields, though, there's a lot more, I would imagine, psychology, there's a lot more applicability right outside of, you know, kind of the faculty, you know, kind of career path. But it's important to just go in. I think your point, Herb, is really well taken, really clear-eyed about kind of, you know, how things are on the ground. Other folks want to offer something that they sort of wish they had known now that they, oh, Carla, I see you.
Yes. So one of the things that we've, you know, touched on a couple of times here, but I think you can never say it enough, is that you deserve to be here. And I think that's probably the thing that I wish I had known as a first gen student, because I always thought I was like, people hadn't figured me out yet. Like, you know, I was just smart. I was smart, but like, you know, they just hadn't figured out that I wasn't really supposed to be there. So just know that you are, and that you bring a lot to the table, and that without your voice and your experiences, there's a hole. So you're there to fill that hole. No one has the experiences that you have. Just bringing, you know, a first gen series, right, to other first gen students, you have to have some awareness or some experience with what that's like. So you're needed in academia, and you do belong here. So I just say that to yourself until you believe it, because it's true.
Yeah, that's been like the mantra of this series, Carla. Thank you. Leanne?
Yeah, just to piggyback real quick what Carla was saying, like when you get to these places, you will realize there are so many mediocre people who don't deserve to be there and got there only because they were groomed and set up. And if they can be there, then you certainly should be there. But the two things, and this is personal, but I think that this is like something to think about for first gen students, because a lot of times first gen students, like in addition to like not having, you know, there's being first gen is associated with not having lots of resources, right? Or lots of things. And one thing that I didn't have as a first gen student was no one told me I had ADHD until after I finished the PhD. Like the week I finished it, I got diagnosed. Do you know how much easier my life would have been? So like, and that, so like that kind of thing is like a resource, right? Like if you are struggling, like with like, if you, maybe you have a learning disability, maybe you have ADHD, maybe there's some, right? If you feel like you're struggling unduly, please try to find the reason behind that. And don't just assume it's like something deficient fundamentally with you. A lot of other people who come from, you know, more educated and resource families, like they get that stuff caught early because their schools catch it, because their parents know to look for it. They know what those things look like. But like a lot of first gen students, we don't come from communities or schools or families where they know what those things are or what they look at. So if you feel like you're struggling unduly, like try to like find out why. And then my other thing that I wish I'd known was that If there is a pathway that is unfamiliar to you, like you have zero experience with it, but you're kind of curious, find a way to do it. Audit a course, take an online thing, ask a mentor. Like no STEM efforts when I was in high school were not a thing. And no one told me engineering was a thing that a girl could do. The boys took physics and the boys could be engineers, and no one even told me what engineering was. And actually as an adult, I think I could have been an engineer. It's not too late, I just don't want to switch careers. But like, there were no like intro to engineering, like what is this, all the different kinds of things. All I knew is that they made a ton of money and did really well. And I watched people do it and I thought, well, how come no one ever told me? Why isn't anyone giving me a chance to try this? Go find it. If there's something, a career you think you might be interested in, you're not sure if you can do it, you're not sure, whatever, just find a way to dip your toe in it. There are ways for you to dip your toe in it. You don't have to stick with what you know or what is familiar. And if you don't like it, you don't have to do it.
That's great, Leanne. I think that's a really important reminder that I feel like a lot of us don't have a high amount of career literacy. Like, I just feel like I didn't know what careers were and existed. And so I think the more we can be explicit about that with our students, the more beneficial will be. Joe, and then Angela.
Yeah, so mine's pretty short. So I would have dumped my associations with the naysayers and the doubting Thomases.
Mm.
That they were almost like a cancer on my dreams and aspirations. And when I started to, I guess, associate more and more with people that were like me, that had no background in college, didn't have that career advice, we all kind of found our way together. And I can think back to a lot of this, my classmates that they become doctors, they become lawyers, they become academics like I, and teaching, had great careers simply because they jettisoned themselves of hearing the people that said that you couldn't do it, or just doubted what you're doing. Oh, you can't do that. Oh, how could you possibly do that if you don't have this, you don't have that resource. And you just, like was said before in the chat and elsewhere, is that you have a passion for something, just do it. And just literally find new friends if you have to find new friends. You don't want to have people constantly beating the drum of how you can't do something or doubting whether or not you could be successful at it. You know you could be successful, so just do it.
That's great, Joe. Thanks. Angela.
So when I was an undergraduate, I wish I had known that I didn't have to be actively struggling to take advantage of a resource. So for example, I could have gone to a professor early in the semester and asked them, what could I do to really succeed in this class? What resources would you suggest? This is what I want to do when I graduate. Is there anything you would suggest I do in this class to really help me with that? I wish I had thought about that just generally. And then as a graduate student and beyond, I wish I realized how important it was for me to set my own boundaries, because within academic fields, you can always do more. You can always be publishing more. You could always be reading more. You can always be doing more service. And that starts in grad school. There are people who were in their first year and were thinking, I have to publish. And the right amount to do is always whatever you did plus one more of whatever it is. So putting the boundaries around it to preserve my mental health would have been great to realize going in. And that's what I would say to anyone going into graduate school.
That's really great, I think, and practical advice. And I love that point, Angela, about how you don't need to be struggling to take advantage of resources. I think I thought that a lot, particularly with like writing centers, right? That if you went to a writing center, it meant you were a bad writer, right? And there was some stigma attached to it. And I really, I think we all need to unlearn some of that thinking that we have. And really, not only is it, there's no stigma, it's like, these things are here, they're here for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Come to us, right? So, and that's a great point about boundaries. Chelsea, I totally agree with you. It's super important.
And if we think about it from a financial sort of standpoint, even, I tell students, like, you already paid for this, right? Like, there are student fees that you pay to access like certain things. So if you don't access them, it's like paying for services and goods, I guess, if you want to think about them that way, that you never actually take advantage of. You're just leaving it on the table. So if that helps you to think about it that way, and that motivates you and encourages you to take advantage of these resources, then think about it that way, because that's, really a mind shift.
So I want to open it up to everyone that's here. We have a few minutes left. I know we've covered a lot of ground, but if there are any questions you have for our panelists, you can pop them in the chat, or I think you should be able to unmute yourself too and raise your hand. Any questions for our panelists, or panelists, if you have any questions for each other? I'll give folks a chance to collect their thoughts for a minute. I'm also, yeah, go ahead, Herbert.
I was going to ask Joe, because Joe manages faculty. From your impression, Joe, what advice would you give to someone who wants to be a faculty member from an administrator's perspective? What makes for successful faculty?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Yeah, I would
Maybe
say
another roundtable.
yeah, but very succinctly, understand the difference between theory and practice, and have the ability to teach theory and teach practice. You don't want to overload too heavy on theory. Don't want to overload too heavy on practice. Because eventually everybody has to get a job. So you have to know practice, but you have to understand once you're in that job, what to do in the job and how to handle it.
I'm also going to be presumptuous and say that our panelists would probably be happy to field questions from students after the event. So feel free to send them along to myself or to Carla. I just popped my email into the chat, and I'd be happy to route them to the appropriate person. Dr. Marquez-Lewis and I are planning to continue this series. We've been basically hosting 2 events every semester, and so we're looking ahead to fall. So also, if you have any ideas about programming that you'd like to see as a student, please also be in touch to let us know that. And yeah, thank you everyone for coming. We really appreciate how busy you are. We know this is like the crunch time closing in on the end of the semester. So we really value your choice to be here with us today and to be in conversation with us. And thank you so much to our panelists as well. Carla, do you have anything you want to add?
No, I think you covered it. Just, a tremendous thank you to the panelists, tremendous thank you to the audience, and we look forward to seeing you again.